Hey everyone, welcome to Learn Chinese Now. I'm Jared Madsen, and this is going to be an epic one. We're going to be hitting the 5 greatest battles in all of China's 5,000 years of history. We've got land battles, naval battles, David and Goliath battles, and some of the greatest military tricks that you'll ever see. Let's get into it. Oh yeah, like and subscribe. 官渡之戰. If you've watched Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Red Cliff, you definitely know about Cao Cao, basically China's Napoleon, tough-talking strategic genius who amassed a huge army and almost ran roughshod all over China. Well, if the Battle of Austerlitz is where Napoleon became known for the best strategic genius in the world, is that true? The Battle of Guandu is where Cao Cao burst onto the scene as a military master. All right, so let's set the stage a bit. We are in the Han Dynasty, all right? It's about 200 AD. The country is falling apart. It's kind of towards the end. The warlords, right, so all these different factions all over China are trying to carve up China and stake their claim. The big warlord in town was this burly guy named Yuan Shao. Now, he has control of all of China north of the Yellow River. So, just to give you an idea, that's like, let's see, if it was in the US, it would be like everything west of the Mississippi, right? Pretty big portion. And he also has the biggest army in the country. Now, Cao Cao, on the other hand, is an ambitious upstart, and he controls most of China south of the Yellow River and wants a dynasty for himself. Cao Cao decided to occupy a fort near the town of Guāndù, which is strategically important because it controls the Yellow River. Just like the Mississippi runs north-south in the US, the Yellow River runs east-west. So this port of Guāndù was incredibly important. It was a strategic point. Yuan Shao, on the other hand, goes there and attacks him. But then Cao Cao sends out a small force to attack Yuan Shao's army from across the river. Yuan Shao thinks Cao Cao is sending his whole army, so he splits off half of his army and goes back to his fort. Cao Cao then attacks Yuan Shao's main army and drives it back. Okay, so this is Cao Cao's first success. But Yuan Shao then regroups and pushes him back to his main base at Guāndù. So I guess kind of ended with neutral. Yuan Shao then lays siege to Cao Cao's fort for 6 months. Now, remarkably though, Cao Cao stays in the fight. Obviously, his supplies are running low after 6 months. Then he gets a remarkable piece of information. Yuan Shao has nearly all of his food supplies in one town. Cao Cao sends a small army to that town and burns it to the ground. Yuan Shao finds out a little too late and has a major freakout. He splits his army to protect the silos, but they are unprepared, and Cao Cao routs them and burns down the silos as well. Right? So this is a huge blow to Yuan Shao. And as soon as his soldiers hear about it, they all start to get a little bit on the nervous side. Cao Cao then seizes the chance and smashes into Yuan Shao's main army, which then falls apart. Right? They are already discouraged. They think they're not going to have any food because they don't, and Cao Cao breaks in. All right, so Yuan Shao has no choice, but he has to retreat. He started the war with 100,000 men and ended it with 600. Not 600,000, 600 men, 600 dudes. That's all he had. So what was the aftermath of this battle? Well, Yuan Shao was done as a warlord. His army was gone, and he died a few years later. Cao Cao was now the head honcho. It looked like he would conquer China and establish his own dynasty. He would be the big boss. But he had another military genius that he had to face off against, Zhuge Liang. And as we'll see later on in this episode, Cao Cao had his hands full trying to deal with him. The Battle of Fei River, Féi Shuǐ. This battle is a prime example of a famous principle from the art of war that all warfare is based on deception. So in Chinese, that's being... actually, let me call a friend really quick. He should know this. Hey Ming, how's it going?
What's up, Jared?
Hey, what's the Chinese phrase from The Art of War that all warfare is based on deception?
The Chinese phrase you're referring to is 兵者诡道也. It's quote from The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist. It's often translated as all warfare is based on deception, or warfare is deception. The phrase emphasizes the importance of cunning, strategy, and deception in warfare, rather than relying on numbers or brute force.
Great, thanks, Ming. And that, everyone, is Character AI, a free online chatbot service that utilizes large language models to offer infinite possibilities. That's right, infinite. There are millions of lifelike characters with thousands of unique voices to interact with, and you can even make your own. Not only that, there are also dozens of languages to choose from. That means with their new calling feature, you can now practice speaking Chinese as if you're talking to a real person anytime, anywhere, just like I did. Sign up today and start practicing. Use my link below to get started. And thanks to Character AI for sponsoring this video. We are now in the year 363. The former Qin Dynasty, which was run by the D tribe, reunified northern China after the Jin left and began raising a massive army to attack the south. 6 out of every 10 able-bodied men were pressed into service for this war, and they ended up with an army of almost 900,000 people. All right, that's a big army now. Back in the day, that was a huge army. The top commander, Fu Jian, said, "If each one of my troops throws his whip into the Yangtze River, the river will stop flowing. 头边断流." On the other hand, the South was only able to muster 80,000 troops. 80,000 versus 900,000. So you do the math. The difference was that Fu Jian's army was a patchwork of all sorts of different tribes, many of whom were forced to join against their will. And the Southern army was a tight, well-trained unit. So you can basically think you have 80,000 Navy SEALs versus 900,000 dudes. The two sides lined up across the Fei River, which is a river that doesn't exist anymore. I guess they drank it all or something, I don't know. The South lined their troops up extra wide, so it looked like they had a big army. Now, Fu Jian didn't realize that he had such a huge advantage in terms of numbers, so he decided to play a coy. He ordered his army to retreat. His idea was that he would wait for the South to cross the river and catch them as they landed. But because Fu Jian's army was such a mismatch of people, the retreat process was a mess. The whole army was disorganized, and most of the troops didn't realize that the retreat was a feint. They thought that the army was really retreating. They're like, oh, we gotta get out of here. So the South decided that that was the moment to strike. They rushed across the river and started an all-out assault. Just think 90,000 Navy SEALs coming at you. Cutting into the disorganized ranks of the Northern Army. Everything was in absolute chaos. And then the South sprung their trap. They had bribed a couple of smaller tribes. They told them, when you see the Southern Army, start shouting, the Qin army has been defeated. And that's exactly what those tribes did. And all of a sudden, the rumor started to spread like wildfire. In all of the confusion, the whole 900,000 person army thought that they had lost and started fleeing. Everyone split up. I mean, they didn't want to be there in the first place, right? They were looking for any reason to leave, right? So everyone split up. They went back to their own tribe. I mean, it was every man for himself. It was horrible. And the elite soldiers of the Southern tribe started massacring these tribes one by one, right? So they all went back and they just went, okay, we'll go here and we'll destroy that tribe. We'll go there, we'll destroy that tribe. They had killed 200,000 people that day alone. And by the time the defeated Northern Army made it back home, 700,000 members of their army had died. The former Qin Dynasty went into civil war. The North broke up into a bunch of tiny countries, and the South was safe. The Battle of the Fei River is such an important battle because it shows that winning a battle is not based solely on the number of troops that you have. It is not based solely on your strength. Without proper training and morale, you may lose even if you have 10-to-1 odds against the enemy. The Battle of Poyang Lake, 鄱阳湖之战. We've got a naval battle. Don't be put off by the fact that it happened on a lake, right? It's still technically a naval battle. It doesn't have to be in the ocean. This was one of the biggest naval battles in world history on a lake. I know it's hard to imagine, but I'll explain. We're in the late 14th century, towards the end of the Yuan dynasty, the dynasty ruled by the Mongolians, right? The Yuan has left China in a mess, and people are fed up with their rule. Uprisings are happening all over China. But before they can defeat the Yuan, before they can push the Mongolians back, these rebel groups have to duke it out among themselves for supremacy. So the battle got started when a group called the Han came into the Poyang Lake and tried to blockade the city of Nanchang, which belongs to the Red Turbans. The Red Turbans soon arrived with their fleet to break the blockade, but they were vastly outnumbered. The Han had almost 700,000 sailors, while the Red Turbans only had about 200,000. The Han ships were massive. They had these things that they called luochuan, which were these kind of floating fortresses that held tons of troops on them. Now, the Red Turbans had fewer ships, but they were smaller and lighter. So they decided to use that to their advantage. They used a three-part strategy. Start with flame attacks, so bombs, fire arrows, and a very basic kind of gun called the fire spear. Sounds really cool. Then get closer with crossbows. Then they wouldn't try to use short-range weapons when they get closer. They tried this twice, and it worked okay. They did some damage to the enemy, but their losses were mounting, and they couldn't fight much longer. But the third time, they had a strong wind at their backs, and their fire attacks tore right through the enemy. The Han lost hundreds of ships. Then the Red Turbans surrounded the Han ships and began to blockade them. The Han tried to counter this by amassing a large group of ships to break through the Red Turban lines. But the Red Turbans sent ships that they had set on fire towards the Han. This scattered the Han, as they were afraid of fire, right? Of course they're afraid of fire, who is it? Then the Red Turbans picked apart the isolated Han ships. This was a massive military upset, and the general in charge, Zhu Yuanzhang, would go on to challenge and defeat the Mongolians and start a whole new dynasty, the Ming Dynasty. The Battle of Gaixia, Guāixia之戰. For this one, we're in about 200 BC. The Qin dynasty has fallen, and two generals are duking it out to see who will form the next dynasty. This is Xiangyu and Liu Bang. Now, originally, everyone thought that Xiangyu would be the one who would win. He had a much bigger army and had even taken over the old Qin capital at one time. But Liu Bang and his top general, Han Xin, were great strategists and figured out time and again how to take advantage of everything. This was late in the war between the two of them. Xiangyu had driven back Liu Bang to his home base. Liu Bang counterattacked by sending an army straight towards Xiangyu's base. Xiangyu was forced to pull back to defend his capital. As he was heading back, Han Xin sent an army to harass his troops. In one of these skirmishes, they captured Xiangyu's favorite concubine, Yu Ji. Xiangyu's generals told him to ignore Yu Ji and get back to the capital. The loss was too great for him. So he split his army, sending half back to the capital and half in pursuit of his concubine. Strategy, I guess. Han Xin saw this coming and started leading him straight into a trap. Han Xin led Xiangyu into a canyon called Gāixià. And then, once Xiangyu entered, had his army surrounded on all sides of the canyon. Xiangyu was undeterred. He fought and actually won back his concubine. Yeah, I mean, if you take a guy's girl, what do you expect, right? But as he did that, Han Xin tightened his noose around Xiangyu's forces. His army even started singing songs from Xiangyu's hometown, making his troops think that they had taken his capital. Xiangyu's troops started deserting and even lost hope. The concubine, feeling terrible for the disaster she felt that she caused, performed one last dance for Xiangyu and then killed herself. horrible. This moment is portrayed in the Chinese opera classic Farewell, My Concubine. The next day, Xiang Yu gathered his troops for one last effort to break out of the encirclement he was trapped in. There's a famous song for the pipa, or the Chinese lute, called Surrounded on All Sides, that captures this moment perfectly. Xiang Yu put all his effort into breaking Han Xin's lines, but he failed. He took his life before Han Xin's troops could get him. And that was the end of the conflict. Liu Bang won and started the Han Dynasty, one of the most successful dynasties in Chinese history. The Battle of Red Cliff, 赤壁之戰. This is the creme de la creme of Chinese battles. It's got big personalities, it's got a great underdog story, and a ton of interesting tactics. All right, so we are back in the Three Kingdoms period, 208 AD. Cao Cao had become the big shot in China and was trying to wipe out his rivals and become the next emperor. Cao Cao had two main rivals, Liu Bei in the south and Sun Quan in the east. Liu Bei had just gotten his butt kicked by Cao Cao, and his army was down to 20,000 men. Cao Cao was moving fast and hoping to reunite China in one fell swoop. Liu Bei knew he couldn't stand a chance against Cao Cao's 500,000 strong army. He sent his genius strategist and negotiator, Zhuge Liang, over to Sun Quan to convince him to form an alliance against Cao Cao. At first, this tactic didn't go so well. You see, Cao Cao had sent Sun Quan a letter stating that he had 800,000 troops. Not sure if that was boasting or not, and that Sun Quan had better surrender. Sun's own advisors were urging him to make peace with Cao Cao, and it seemed like Zhuge Liang would fail in his quest. But Sun Quan was a stubborn man, and he wanted to fight. One day, his advisors met in his great hall and again urged him to make peace with Cao Cao. Sun Quan suddenly stood up, took out his sword, and chopped a corner off of the table in front of him. And he said, "Any man who doesn't want to fight will have the same fate as this table." Oh, you want to end up like this table, buddy? Yeah, I didn't think so. And with that, the alliance was formed. Even allied together, Liu and Sun's forces amounted to only about 50,000, a tiny sum compared to what Cao Cao had. But Sun had a massive fleet on the Yangtze River, and his troops were well trained to fight on water. Cao Cao's troops were not, so the allies decided to meet Cao Cao at Red Cliff, a spot where the river was over a mile wide. Badly outnumbered, the allies had to use every trick in the book to survive the battle. The first hurdle they ran into was when the allies realized that they were short on arrows, and they wouldn't have time to manufacture new ones. So the strategist, Zhuge Liang, built a bunch of dummy boats filled with strawman soldiers, right? So just scarecrows, basically, and with straw roofs. He sent them swiftly across the river at Cao Cao's forces. Cao Cao thought it was a surprise attack and ordered his archers to shoot down all the troops before they could get to his boats. He peppered the boats with arrows until they finally stopped and retreated back to the Allied shore. Cao Cao thought he won a victory, but really, it was just a ploy, as the dummy boats came back and the Allies now had 100,000 extra arrows. To this day, this is one of the most famous idioms, and it is called 草船借箭. The straw boat borrows arrows. They did a little more than borrowing. They took them. I guess they borrowed, and then they're gonna send them back. The second problem is that Cao Cao had a spy high up in the Allied camp. So all of their military plans were getting to him. One day, they figured out who the spy was, and they decided to use him to their advantage. They left a fake letter in the commander's office for the spy to run into when he was snooping around. The letter showed that Cao Cao's top admirals were actually spies for the Allies. The spy reported to Cao Cao, who had his admirals killed at once. Pretty good trick. But those admirals weren't actually spies, obviously, and now Cao Cao had to go into naval battles without naval officers. this was a major problem for Cao Cao. He was having trouble training his ground troops to go on water because they kept getting seasick, and now he didn't have the people to train them. So he decided to tie all of his boats together to keep them steady, right? Really good idea, right? Okay, but this played right into the hands of the Allies, who had their greatest trick in store. The Allies prepared a bunch of bomb boats, which were heavily armored boats filled with gunpowder. Then they waited for the right moment. There's a famous Chinese saying, 万事俱备，只欠东风, which basically means that everything's ready, and now we're just waiting for the eastern wind to come. And that's what the Allies needed. They waited and waited until finally a stiff breeze came up from the east. Then they attacked, ramming their bomb boats into Cao Cao's boats. They burst into flames, and the wind from the east started spreading the fire across to the other boats. Because Cao Cao's boats were all tied up, no one could escape, and thousands of Cao Cao's troops died. The Allies launched a small army on the other side of the river and did a flank attack against Cao Cao's ground troops. With the shock of his naval defeat, Cao Cao was totally unprepared for the flank attack, and he had to retreat. 50,000 beating 500,000. It was one of the biggest military upsets in history. The Allies started chasing after Cao Cao's army and almost destroyed it, but he just got away. And soon, the Allies started bickering among themselves over the resources. Liu Bei and Sun Quan split up and formed their own states. Hence, the three kingdoms were formed. All right, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or you want to hear me talk about anything else, leave those in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. 再见. And the general in charge, Zhu Yuanzhang. This was how you say it. So this is the crème de la crème. Am I saying that right? That's French. So this is the crème de la crème of Chinese battles.